I think Ross talked a little earlier about the future of creativity. I'm going to frame that same discussion, but in the context of the enterprise and what we're seeing happening within the enterprise as a crowdsourcing movement in many ways to drive creativity. You know, I spend a fair bit of my time, in fact, pretty much most of my time, speaking with senior business leaders across Asia, and trying to really work out what they're really worried about, what they're excited about. And in the enterprise, what we're starting to see is that most business leaders are excited and worried about the same thing. It's about the pace of innovation around them, and how it's creating some very serious disruptive shifts in business leadership. This is true for Google too. So, you know, even for Google as a company, we're always looking at how innovation can help us leapfrog and not be leapfrog. This is the same concern that a lot of business leaders have. If you're not consistently innovating now, you're potentially going to be disruptive. One of the best charts I've seen of this, can you guys hear me at the back? Yeah, great. One of the best charts and best illustrations I've seen of this is this slide up here. So that's a flow of the S&P 500 over the last 50 years. So in 1957, so I mean, the S&P 500, as you guys know, is probably an index of, well, it is an index of the leading companies in the U.S. across a broad spectrum of industries. And in 1957, the average age of companies on the S&P 500 was 75 years. So these are large, established organizations who've taken up to 75 years and above, you know, to create wide distribution channels to the consumer, to fine-tune their supply chain so they've taken all the costs out of it, to have preferential access to capital. Essentially created a huge economy of scale and various things. And many of you have seen some of the names here. Many of you in this room represent companies such as that. Fast forward that to 2013. The average age of companies on the S&P 500, 10 years. 10 years. And if you just take that graph for the next 5 years, you can imagine what the average age of companies is going to be. The barriers to entry are absolutely getting smashed. You've got new, young, innovative companies coming out there, competing in the main space. So if you're a large enterprise, you know, you're normally worried about the next competitor. And you know, most of us know the next competitor. We often work for it. We know their strategies, we know the people. And it's relatively easy to compete with the devil you know. But how do you compete with someone who may not have even been born with it? And that's what the trajectory is showing us. One of the good examples I've seen of this is a company called Ouya. How many of you have heard of Ouya? I would have thought in this forum a few more. So Ouya is a small $99 Android-based gaming device that was developed by a bunch of veterans of the gaming industry. So if you know the gaming industry well, you've got some big names. You've got some big names in the gaming industry. So Ouya came out with a product and they wanted to go to market. And what's the first thing you need when you need to go to market? You need capital, you need money. And even in an innovation-friendly country like the US, you know, it could take you 3 to 6 months, several rounds of VC funding, several presentations of business plans before you get the money. Ouya wanted $1 million. So instead of going down the normal route, Ouya went to Kickstarter, and they raised $1 million in 8 hours. They raised $8.5 million in 30 days. So if you're a large enterprise, if you're one of the established gaming companies, you've got a new entrant, a new competitor born in 30 days, who might not take you out of business, but they can take 2 or 3 percentage points off your market share, and that could be a real problem. Barriers to entry are starting to crash. I was just telling Sean just when we met earlier this morning, you know, I have a 14-year-old son. I have 2 boys, 14 and 10. The 14-year-old is he's a developer, he's an Apple developer. He's into development and stuff like that. And he came to me the other day. He's 14 years old. He came to me the other day and he said he invested in 2 companies on Kickstarter. mean, if you're going to build that, I mean, think of the crowdsourcing movement. Think about how it disrupts, potentially, how does that disrupt the standard means of getting money, which are, standard money makers. So there's a whole disruption starting to happen. And interestingly, most people think that the disruption is coming because of technology innovation. And that's true. To some extent, that's true, technology innovation. But it's more than that. Why are the barriers to entry crashing so much? As you've just seen, as you see that graph go downwards, that'll be a couple of years. And it's more than technology innovation. And one of the things that we're seeing is that many of these young, innovative companies are changing the game on larger, slower-moving enterprises by adopting trends that we are extremely familiar with in our personal lives. When you look at mobility, look at cloud, you look at social, each one of us in this room is extremely familiar with these. You're using Google Plus or Facebook, you're using all of these free technology, if I can call it that right now. And what a lot of these young innovative companies are doing is they're leveraging and exploiting these trends to change the go-to-market and getting huge economies of scale. Being able to use social, being able to use the ability to get across to massive audiences without having a huge infrastructure spend is one thing that they're capable of doing. They're leveraging that capability. The cloud, we talked about it, I think Shelly talked about it a little earlier, but the cloud offers unlimited compute capacity at a fraction of the cost. One of the things we're starting to see is a lot of these young, innovative companies are building very sophisticated systems for collaboration, for crowdsourcing, for their supply chains. They're building them on a cloud at a fraction of the cost of large enterprises. And they're using the fact that the mobile has become the ubiquitous device around. They're starting to reach out to these audiences, their consumers, their supply chains, their stakeholders around these devices. So it's not just about technology innovation. It's about a change in go-to-market strategy that a lot of the young companies are starting to take. And they're actually changing the game of the larger enterprises and kind of catching them off guard a little bit. This is a trend that we're continuing to see across the board. So the question if you're a large enterprise, the question for you is, are you ready? Are you actually ready to compete with someone you don't know? And brings us to the whole concept of, either creativity or innovation. And I've been a student of innovation for a long, long time, and I've tried to really try and understand, what makes a particular company innovative. And there's a lot of pundits, a lot of books that have been written, but there's one common theme. The common theme is that you've got to create an ideas factory, and let 1,000 ideas be. And a lot about what we're starting to see around innovation is companies bringing the right talent in, and within the enterprise, having the right culture, the right set of processes, the right set of technologies to allow people to come up with a number of ideas, share them at the speed of light, be very agile, share them across mobile devices, across their organization, across their supply chain and their consumer bases. We're starting to see some very interesting trends within enterprises of, I'm calling crowdsourcing, but essentially of getting ideas in product design, in marketing, in development, in process redesign within an organization by tapping into the power of the crowd within the organization. But in order to do that, you need to have the right culture. You need to have the right processes. And you need to have the right technology to drive that degree of innovation. And I think a lot of companies have started to realize, a lot of business leaders have started to realize that if you do not have the right DNA for innovation, chances are that you will be disrupted. Chances are that you will potentially be one of the ones that will get leapfrogged. Sean showed it a little earlier, slide of the number of the top 10 industries that are potential to be disrupted. And you've got some pretty traditional industries out there. It's not just about entertainment, and we all understand entertainment. But it's about healthcare. It's about financial services. So a lot of large enterprises at the senior business leadership level are starting to understand that they need to find a way to create a culture, a set of technology and processes around innovation, around being able to tap into the wisdom of the crowds within their ecosystem, their employee base, and then outside. One of the surprising things you will see, you will expect, and you'd almost expect it in this audience, that this is a given. One of the surprising things that we've seen in core enterprise is that there's still latency. We're still seeing latency in terms of a large enterprise's ability to move as fast as they need to around this theme. But we're starting to see a small degree of change. There was a research that was done by Forrester in the US that showed that now over 50% of employees are starting to bring their own applications, their own technology to work. Whether it's bring your own devices, bring your own applications, and the game is changing for the technology management to start providing the right framework for them to be able to bring their own productivity tools, to collaborate, communicate within the organization. There was a study that was done by Cisco in the US that showed that 3 out of 5 college leaving graduates would take a job with less pay if they were allowed to bring their own applications into work. So we're starting to see this momentum happening. It's happening a lot slower than we'd like. We're starting to see this momentum happening where companies are starting to look at ways to bring consumer innovation into the enterprise. And it's a lot of what Google as a company is trying to do in the enterprise space is bring consumer innovation that has radically transformed our personal lives, bring that same consumer innovation into the enterprise to facilitate collaboration across the workforce. Because we believe that leads to innovation. And that leads from innovation to making sure that you're in business. Essentially, one of the things, and I'm sure you're going to hear this over the course of the next 3 or 4 days, one of the things that is really important if you're going to drive innovation inside the enterprise is to bring consumer technology. So enterprises have traditionally been preoccupied by bringing in, I would say, highly customized, highly difficult to use technology that people don't actually enjoy using. Whereas if you think about consumer technology that you use today, many of you are still on your smartphones and your laptops and tablets and so on. You're used to using a number of products from companies such as Google and other organizations here who bring you technology that's easy to use. It's actually quite easy to make technology that's hard to use. It's quite hard to make technology that's fun to use, interactive, and easy. And it's important that enterprises start bringing in consumer technology to drive this productivity and innovation, provide the right platform for crowdsourcing to happen in the enterprise. The second is cloud. Starting to provide massive scale of providing technologies on the cloud platform. A number of technologies that you'll hear about today would not be viable, would not be able to provide you with the benefits around crowdsourcing had it not been for the cloud, because it provides you with massive scale at a fraction of the cost. So that's the second thing that we're starting to see a number of people consider. And one of the things that Google in the enterprise is starting to do is we're starting to, again, bring this consumer heritage technology, bring a massive economies of scale of the cloud, but bring a rich set of customer experiences in terms of customer support to provide this benefit to consumers. And essentially, our approach is to get employees to work the way they live. So that they can collaborate, they can innovate as a group within the enterprise with the right set of culture and the right set of technology.
In China, starting up a company has a skill. It takes something like 68 days, whereas at Singapore, to start up a company in a very short time. I think one of the key things about innovation is this drag caused by bureaucracy. One of the things I think thoughts on how this crowdsourcing could overcome something like a country with very sort of deep bureaucratic system which tends to.
So I'll try and stay away from the bureaucracy and the legal discussion from this. But I think, when you're talking about startups, the things that you need is access to scale, access to consumers, access to capital. I think there's a number of things that are happening within, in Singapore and in other countries where those nexus of forces are coming together. Again, as I said earlier, the cloud is providing the ability for people to put their application and reach a massive audience through at a very low cost. And part of this is crowdsourcing models such as Kickstarter and other platforms that you'll hear about is providing access to capital a lot easier than it otherwise would. I think you're seeing a number of forces coming together for startups to be able to reach out to their consumers, reach out to their audience without that degree of difficulty that has been there in the past. And we as a company are promoting that.
It's so simple to do, and you face it within large enterprises every day. Give me your experience, what's your cue or whatever that says this company is ready for it, or we are going to slow drag our way to forever trying to get this right?
I think the biggest thing is the appetite for senior management for change. And as we all know in this room, change is a great thing and can be perceived as a tough thing. And the main ingredient we look for is how key is the business leadership in that particular organization for change, and what is the nature of the change that they're trying to instill in the organization. So a lot of companies that we tend to work with today in the enterprise are companies that are trying to change their culture, to become more innovative, to become more transparent, become more fun, become more cool, become more collaborative. I think if you've got those thought processes happening in your management structure, then that's when we start working with companies. And what we don't try to do is instill and force that change. I think that change has got to come, that desire to change has got to come from within, for whatever dynamics the organization is facing.
What kind of things you can imagine an organization like Google doing in the area of crowdsourcing in the future?
At the end of this week, you yourselves will come up with hundreds of examples of where you've already seen a few so far. You'll come up with hundreds of examples where you can start using this concept, this frame. As a company, there's a number of things that are quite well known that we use crowdsourcing as a way of gathering data for example, on our Maps platform. And I think on Thursday you'll hear one of my colleagues speak about this in terms of how we gather data to have the most recent geolocation information available so people can go about their personal lives and know where they go. And that becomes possible partly because we crowdsource that information. Look at the development that is happening in different countries, in emerging markets. The development is going at such a fast pace that you can't possibly collect all that information by yourself. So we crowdsource and does that. That's one example. And we have several examples. As I said earlier, Google certainly as a company is very passionate about innovation, about collaboration in areas of product development, in areas of process redesign. I think this concept of internal crowdsourcing is inherently built into the DNA of the organization. And we've got tons of examples across every process, certainly in terms of product development.